Hello, and welcome back to another Traeger video, where today I am going to do the Jool mission, the second Jool mission. In this Jool mission, my objective is to try and fly more than one helicopter on Jool, and transfer a Kerbal between the helicopters. I am currently launching it on my giant rocket called the Rocket of Insanity, and yes, you can see I am approaching orbit now. This mission is overbuilt like crazy. It makes me seem like I'm an inexperienced player. At the end of the mission, I ended up having over 6 kilometers per second of Delta V just jettisoned because I took too much fuel. In fact, I could have probably flown it on a much smaller rocket as well if I had realised that. The reason why I overbuilt it is because on the previous mission I used up all the fuel on the first transfer stage, and I had to use some of the return fuel to capture around Jool. So I then overbuilt it. I guess overbuilding it is better than underbuilding it. Anyway, here I am doing some orbital maneuvers to get to Jool. And here I am capturing around Jool. I decided not to do any gravity assists because this craft is so big and heavy that it's just too hard to turn around if I screw up the burn, and the RCS thrusters are just too small to do much of an effect. Here I am doing the second capture burn around Jool because I split it in two. And I will be landing after this. I say landing, it's not really landing, it's more hovering in Jool's atmosphere. So there I am captured around Jool. There I am circularizing. Anyway, time to get the Kerbals in the lander and send the lander down. So there I am inflating the heat shields on the lander, and here I am sending it into Jool's atmosphere. This lander weighs over 160 tons, and it has 5 of the big heat shields, 1 to shield the rocket and the other 5 to shield the propellers, and it has a big drag brake at the top to keep it stable. I separate the heat shields using 12 of the Flea SRBs and the 2 engines at the top, the 2 vector engines at the top. I then separate the drag brake, which wasn't very cleanly separated. I separate the drag brake and I descend under the power of auto rotation. The descent takes quite a long time because the lander descends at 60. It descends at a relatively low speed, and you can't use physical time warp with propellers spinning because the Kraken attacks them. So it takes about an hour to do the descent. So this footage is sped up 16 times. You can see I am coming through 10 kilometers now. At 0 kilometers where I intend to land, the atmosphere is like 50 times more than Kerbin's atmosphere. So here we are, approaching the minimum altitude that I will go, where I will start to use the throttle to hold it at the same to sort of hover, and now I will separate the mini helicopter. Now this is where the disaster strikes, because the intent was to use the remote control function to control the small helicopter. Now, the remote control function is where you have a pilot on another craft remotely controlling another craft nearby using antennas. But what went wrong, I actually don't know what went wrong, but I'm assuming it's something to do with the type of antennas I used, and the fact I separated one of them on the other helicopter. This means I have no control, and I didn't even check to see if I had control, and I took off. I have no control. The only control I have is of the speed of the motor. So I try and control my altitude with changing the speed of the motor. So what I'm doing is I'm lowering the speed of the motor to sort of fly about the same height as the lander. That could have been a disaster because it could have blown the Kerbal off of the helicopter by the aero forces. Anyway, I try and hover it at about the same height as the lander, and now I send the lander over to it, as I have no control of that helicopter, but I do have control of the lander, so I'm able to move the lander over to it. One of the improvements to the lander means you can translate it horizontally now. Before, if you tried this with the old lander, it would lose control. That's because I've changed the positioning of the center of lift versus center of mass. Next, I attempt to try docking it to the mini helicopter. Of course, it doesn't properly dock because then you would lose control. So the mini helicopter just sort of sits on top with its 4 legs. So I try getting it to touch down on the nose of the lander by just moving the lander around. This is a very difficult process because the lander, you cannot move the lander as precisely as a small helicopter when you have control of the small helicopter. As you can see, I'm having a real hard time controlling this because the lander isn't meant for such fine maneuvers. And a few times I end up bouncing the small helicopter off of the lander. So I try and line it up again, and I slowly go up towards it. Very slowly, trying to slowly adjust my position relative to it to try and get the small helicopter to sit on top of it. And I do. I manage to get one leg on top of it, but the ladder isn't aligned. This is where the big disaster strikes. So I was a bit stupid and decided to try changing the... Bob fell off of it. What I tried to use the torque of the motor to rotate the ladder, when I could have just rotated the lander. I was very stupid. So now I have to try and glide Bob to this other helicopter that is here, and try and get him to grab hold of the ladder. However, trying to do this, I hit the side and Bob falls to his doom. With no way of getting Bob back, I decide it's best to return to Kerbin. There we go, there's Bob dying. So, after that disaster, I decided to return the lander early. So here I am doing the takeoff from Jool. This requires setting the 4 propellers to max power and making it go up at full speed. The lander goes up for about 30 minutes, and it goes up until it reaches around 75 to 80 kilometers, where the atmosphere is about 1.5 times higher than that of Kerbin's atmosphere. You can see I am rotating the lander to align it to the direction I want to send the rocket to make it easier to fly the rocket. You can see I'm at 50 kilometers now. When it reaches around 75 kilometers, that's when I will separate the 4 propeller blades, the 4 rotor blades, and I will fire the rocket. And there we have separation of the 4 rotor blades. Now I am using the rocket. I aim to point at the horizon around 160 kilometers with the gravity turn, and then I burn completely horizontally with the second stage to bring myself up to orbital velocity. This ascent reminds me of an ascent into Earth orbit, with the way it goes up and then back down slightly before reaching orbital velocity. Jool is also the size of Earth. So here I am doing the Jool ejection burn. Here I am doing a bit of a gravity assist with Val and Tylo. And here comes Tylo. So yes, what happened is, basically what happened with the control is I was supposed to have remote control of the small helicopter, but I think I used the wrong antenna, which made me lose remote control ability. And I didn't check before I took off, and I took off without remote control. And now we are coming back to Kerbin with only 2 Kerbals as a result of that. So here we are entering Kerbin's atmosphere, flying over the pole, after a partial failure of a Jool mission. Remember, if you didn't enjoy this video, to dislike and unsubscribe, and maybe you won't watch the next video.